All right, so I don't quite know what
There we
I
go.
can teach you all that you don't already know about Antarctica, but here we go. Um, so I got to go with Ocean Nova and Antarctica 21. Um, let's see. Started out in Buenos Aires, obviously. I had a really long layover. I think it was a 20-hour layover, so overnight, which was nice. I got to take a long taxi from Izazia, about 45 minutes, but it was really pretty. It was very warm, very humid, quite a shock coming from Montana. And it was about $30 paid at the airport. You know, those of you who've been, I'm sure you remember they would kind of just wait by the doors for people who look lost. And I took them up on the offer because I was very tired and not about to navigate public transit into the city. Um, but it was fine. Um, and then 15 minutes from Recoleta, where I stayed, to our parque, which granted was pretty easy because there was almost no traffic at 4 in the morning when my flight to Ushuaia left. San Recoleta Hotel is one that we work with. I thought it was really nice. It's directly across the street from the cemetery, plenty of things to do in walking distance. It felt like a very upscale, safe neighborhood, although it's not quiet. So I'm not quite sure if you guys are helping people choose hotels, but if people are like wanting a good night's sleep, I don't recommend that neighborhood. If they want to party, I do. Um, and then in the area, there's plenty of things to do. I just took the afternoon because I got into town around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, Wandered around the cemetery for a bit, really pretty, free. Um, there was a bookstore that I really wanted to see. It was this gorgeous old theater that they turned into a bookstore, also free to go visit. And then the art museum, which I love art museums, and it was $3 to get in. So would definitely recommend that area. Just some pictures of the area, all within about 15 minutes walk from Recoleta. And then Ushuaia, I had one night there. I didn't do a whole lot in Ushuaia, just the timing of my flight getting in and then the cruise leaving the next day. I didn't have a ton of time to uh, leave the city area for a hotel or anything, or sorry, not for a hotel, for a hike. So I kind of just wandered around the docks and just relaxed, took it easy. It was pretty easy to get between the airport and the hotel. I was worried about cutting it close on when I left. I was on the 11 o'clock flight from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires, and the ship got into port at 8. And some people were saying that we weren't going to make it, but got off at 9. It was a 10-minute taxi ride and had no problem getting into the flight. So I think I was very lucky. I felt like everything that I did was kind of charmed in a way. So not everyone's going to have it that easy, but this whole trip was, all the timings felt really good. I had been told, I don't remember by whom, that the taxi drivers would take cards. Maybe some companies do. The ones that were between the docks and the airport did not. They only took cash. By the end of this, I was out of pesos, so I only had USD. They took it, but they gave change in pesos, and it was not the best exchange rate because it was at his discretion. So, you know, can't say I blame him. So, you know, let people know. And Rachel, I think it was you that stayed at Hotel Monaco for a night and hated it. I talked to at least 2 other people on the cruise who also did at least one night there, and they were like, oh no, this is terrible, I'm getting out. So I know that that's not one that we work with, but if other people are like talking about it, maybe just let them know it's not a good choice, because I've never heard a good thing said about it. I personally stayed at Hotel Albatross. It was really nice, really great service. They were so helpful with everything. Really good at understanding my terrible Spanish. So I really appreciated staying there, and it was also right next to the dock, which was very convenient. And there's the boat. Definitely, it was the smallest ship in the port when I went. There were a lot of, not a lot, but several much larger ships, and it really gave me an appreciation for what we mean when we say small ship cruise. There was a Princess ship and the World Explorer and L'Austral, I think, were all in port at the same time. And they all, even the smaller ones, just dwarfed Ocean Nova. It's really small. We only had 68 passengers on this cruise, which was really good for everybody being able to be off the ship at the same time. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know this already, but getting to experience that and really see how quickly and easily everyone could get off the ship and how much time we had on land at each landing really put that into perspective for me, at least. And you also get to know everybody. By the end, it was kind of like a family, which was nice. Not the fanciest ship, definitely comfortable. This was probably the fanciest trip I've ever taken. I've never stayed in any place so nice as the hotels that I got to stay at. Never been on a cruise before, so for me, like, I mean, I'm usually a backpacker hostel type person, so for me this was like the height of luxury, and I thought it was great. Heard some grumblings from people who were used to fancier, but I think, you know, if you're there for the experience, we definitely got a fantastic experience. Comfortable. The food was great. I did hear a lot of people like expressing surprise at how wonderful the food was, and it was a really fantastic selection, variety of things every single day. For how small of a group of people it was, I thought the variety was interesting and impressive. Let's see. So this was the first night after boarding. We're doing the safety presentation, just a drill to figure out where the lifeboats are and learn how to put on life jackets and the survival suits, which were a little scary. We didn't put them on, but we watched someone else. This is still going through the Beagle channel. The rest of the presentation is just pictures. Feel free to ask questions or comment. It's kind of weird being so silent. I'm not sure if I like everybody being muted. So pitch in, please. Let's make this
unmuted. There, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm actually really thrilled about being able to have this page in my passport. Not only having stamps, these little kitschy souvenir stamps. The Ushuaia one they had at the tourist station at the dock. It's kind of a, I don't know, silly little place to go, but they'll stamp it for free, and they're actually very nice and very helpful. And then the ship gave us the Antarctica season 2019-20 stamp, which I thought was kind of cool. And then to have it all topped off with a leap day stamp, I thought was pretty unique. So that was fun. Pros and cons to going this late in the season. It was pretty warm. Most days it was above 40. I think the only day that I remember feeling chilled at all was the day that we actually were on the peninsula, which was also, of course, the furthest south that we went. Not a lot of penguins. Most of the colonies were already out to sea for the season, according to our naturalists, and those that were left behind were still molting, so they weren't very pretty. So, you know, I think when I picture Antarctica and penguin colonies, I picture like those vast fields just like teeming with penguins, and definitely had that once, but not everywhere, kind of like I think a lot of people were expecting. And those that we did see were really ruffled looking. They were in the process of losing their current feathers and gaining new ones, and they were just sitting around looking kind of grumpy, with the exception of the chin straps on Deception Island.
And what about the chicks? I've always wondered what they look like at that point in time. I mean, because they're not molting yet. So are there chicks that you're able to see still that are larger that you can tell are different in some way?
Not that I could tell were chicks, no. I mean, our naturalists were like, that's a chick right there. And I'm like, that just looks like a slightly smaller penguin. So when I was not a time for chicks, I think.
When I was there like a couple weeks before you, or like a week before you, I saw like a couple, but they weren't like chicks.
Yeah. I mean,
but they weren't molting, right? They were just, aren't they like off doing stuff, or can you notice them different?
I saw one that was like molting a little bit, but maybe it was a teenager. I don't know. It was a weird.
I don't know enough about penguins to give authority on what they were doing. There were definitely some smaller ones. I think when the naturalists pointed them out, I could tell that, oh, that's a smaller one, that's a chick. But I mean, with my untrained eyes, they all look like penguins to me. So if people are wanting to see chicks, I don't think I would say this is the time to go. Lots of whales though. We saw blows every single day, even the day that I didn't leave my cabin because I was so seasick crossing the Drake the first way. Just looking out the window, I was seeing whales. So that was great. And we saw, I think we ticked off every species that we had on our checklist, which was pretty cool. There was one morning that we were woken up by announcements that we were following a pod of orcas. So that was so amazing.
That's cool.
Not a lot of snow. What was left was pretty dirty. Lots of penguin trails, lots of penguin poop trails. lots of chunks of ice. So definitely I could see then what people would mean when they say that earlier in the season you do have that more pristine ice and snow, because we did not have that. But more navigable seas, they did comment multiple times about how, oh, we normally can't come down this far because of ice. So that was nice to be able to at least feel like you're seeing something that no one else has really seen before. So this was the route that we took. It was pretty good because we got to do 2 landings every single day, which was nice.
Wow.
So we started out on the far east and then kind of sort of made our way west and then south and then north again. Our expedition team leader kept making jokes about how he was worried he was going to get fired because of the route that he took and because fuel is so expensive. I'm not quite sure how kidding he was, but it was a pretty ridiculous route. So let's see. So we started out our first day of landings. We did Eden Rocks and the Danger Islands. Oh, this was still along the crossing of the Drake. They told us that we had a very calm Drake. My stomach disagreed. But it was sunny and clear, and by the second day, once the meds kicked in, it was fine, and it was great. We had lectures both days. I'm really sorry that I missed the first day of lectures, but the second day was great. I don't know if, can you guys see the videos here? Is it covering up this side of the screen?
I see a man standing on the deck and then
Yeah.
Nothing moving, just pictures.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if you guys could see the you guys that I have up here for Ring Central. But.
Oh, I have I have the video on my second screen. So.
Okay, just making sure that I wasn't blocking the view for you guys. Yeah, so this was just walking along the decks looking for whales. This gentleman here is actually Steve Schellenberg, who is also the naturalist when Kelly and Molly went last year. So small world. It was really cool to see somebody who knew somebody else. And then some penguins. I think that was our first sighting of penguins on our way down. And then since we did spend a lot of time in the wet LC, we saw a lot of these great big flat-topped icebergs. I don't know if you may have heard it, there was some clickbaity headlines about largest iceberg ever broken off of a sheet. I think it was named A68 or something like that. According to the captain, we passed right by it. This is not it, but we did look up one morning over breakfast and it just looked like a continent was floating right past us. It was huge. So I was also very struck by how clear the water was.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, this was from our first day of excursions around Eden Rocks. We started it out with a Zodiac cruise. The landing site was a very small, narrow beach, so they could only take one Zodiac unloading at a time. So they kind of just sent us out into the bay and would radio whoever was next in line while we were looking for critters, and we found them. So this was, again, that first day, we found a leopard seal just chilling out on the ice and wanted to come and check us out. These are actually 2 different leopard seals, both seen on the same day.
Yeah.
So we saw 2 leopard seals and then plenty of birds that day, but only 1 penguin. So they told us when we were on the way here that there was an Adelie penguin colony, but I think they were already out to sea by the time that we got there. So it was a pretty steep climb up to the top of the mountain, not mountain, island. But we had a pretty decent view from up there. All of this pinkish, reddish, what looks like mud might be mud mixed with a lot of penguin droppings. And I know people talk about the smell, but oh my goodness, it was awful. It was just the worst thing I've ever smelled. And it was endless and just kind of got into everything. Yeah, it was delightful. But it was very pretty there. So this was the first hike up, and then we did on the way back to the ship stop and see a colony of cormorants. And then this bird on the right is a snowy sheathbill, which apparently they eat poop, which I think is kind of gross, but considering the number of penguins there, they must be well fed. So lots of birds, so gross, but pretty. So this is the only penguin that we saw that day. It was in Adelie and it was injured and it was on the same ice floe as one of the leopard seals. And I don't know if they knew the other was also on that chunk of ice. But we got up kind of close, and then as we left, the guide was like, yeah, that penguin's not going to last the day. So we all mourn this little Adelie penguin. And then throughout the afternoon, we kind of just, as we cruised to our next destination, looked at lots and lots of ice because that's what there is. So that evening, we went to the Danger Islands for a sunset hike. There's more snow here, more penguins, but again, they were all molting. There weren't as many as I expected to see. You know, decent crowd, but not those vast, dense fields of penguins. And they were all molting, so they weren't really doing anything. They kind of all just sat there and looked grumpy, but it's easy to take pictures of them that way. So we got to walk around quite a bit here. Good sunset hike. Because we were so far south, the sunset just took a lot longer, so we had this nice long golden hour. And I thought the islands are beautiful. They're very sculptural here. We were still far enough north too that there were some lichens on the ground. So if you see some sort of greenish tinge, that's what that would be. So that was the first day of exploring. Second day, we were woken up dark and early by an announcement that they saw orcas. So a lot of us rushed out onto the decks in our pajamas at 6 in the morning. To watch the sun come up and to follow the whales. So that was a pretty magical morning and a really good way to start the day. Probably my favorite morning there. And it was just, you know, gorgeous. There are no words. It was just gold and ice and beautiful and crystal clear water. And you could see right through to the icebergs underneath and so still. It was a very nice just moment of peace. And I'm very glad these days that I have that memory. So this day we made our way to Devil Island. And I'm not sure if you look very closely, kind of towards the middle left of this picture, there is a seal of some kind on that chunk of ice.
Oh, there is, isn't
Yeah.
there? I would have never noticed.
Yeah, I was already like zoomed in as close as I could get, but he's there.
It's crazy how those guides would be like, there's a seal over there. I'm like, how could you possibly see that?
Some of them, it was nuts. I don't know how their eyes work. I guess you just kind of learn to see those shapes.
Yeah, after that many years and trips.
Yeah. So here we got to see some more seals up close, including a crab eater kind of in the shallows right off the beach of this island and a fur seal that was on the beach. And I didn't even see it until I walked too close to it. There was a guide kind of hanging out, and I was like, why are you just standing here? And then I walked past him and he's like, there's a seal there, you should keep your distance. And sure enough, I looked to my left and they're enormous. I knew logically that they were large animals, but seeing one like right next to me, I was like, oh, okay. I'm sure you've all seen that video going around of the reporter in Yellowstone with the bison. That was pretty much me with the seal. They're terrifying. But they just kind of sat around looking proud like this. So fur seal, crab eater, and then we took a hike right up to the top of the mountain. It was a pretty short hike, but very steep. And the ground that they marked the trail out on was, I think, the most stable that they could find, but it was a lot of just like scree over mud. So it was not very, not very easy. So a lot of the older folks on the trip were grumbling and having a hard time, but it was a fantastic view. We could see all the way around the island. It's a pretty small island, but you could see this channel on one side and then the ship on the other side.
What would you say the average age was of people on the ship? Or was it varied?
It was pretty varied. The youngest person, I think, was like a 14-year-old who was actually one of our travelers. He was there with his family. And then the oldest were probably in their 70s. Most people, I would say, would be in their 30s or 40s. I was kind of surprised at how young the average group was. And there were a bunch of other young solo travelers.
That's cool.
Between 21 and 35, I would say. And then we kind of just grouped together at breakfasts and hung out a lot. This lady here in the green was actually one of our travelers. She was very nice. So that was a good hike right up to the top and then looking out towards the ship. It was kind of scary at the top there because it falls away on 3 sides. I'm not usually afraid of heights, but I got to the very edge where the flags are and just kind of froze and had to very slowly back away. But the view was fantastic. The people who didn't make it up to the top didn't seem too fussed about it until they saw the pictures from the top. And then I think they were like, oh, we should have kept going because this was the view. You could just kind of look down and see the zodiacs coming in and out. It was fantastic. But again, not a lot of wildlife here beyond those 2 seals. And I don't think there were any penguins there either. Lots of cool ice on the way back to the ship. And then we did spot this Weddell seal. And then that was the tiny gangway that we used to get on and off the ship. It was surprisingly difficult for me, I think, to get on and off the Zodiacs. I'm not sure how much of that is because in some instances the water was surprisingly rough, or because it was a very small ship and it just moved around a lot. Like you could feel it moving constantly.
Did they only load one Zodiac at a time?
Yeah.
Or was there 2? Okay.
Yeah, no, the only one at a time because that's all there was room for. But it went pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I never really, like even when there was kind of a long line, I never felt like I was waiting in line.
They didn't have groups or anything? They didn't have that on my ship either?
No, nothing pre-assigned or anything like that. It was just kind of first come, first serve.
First come, first serve, yeah.
Yeah, which was nice because then you could kind of just team up with people that you had already met and were friendly with, and you could be like, hey, you guys want to be on a boat together? Let's do it. Or you could avoid people if you wanted to do that too. I had something else I was going to say about that and lost it. Maybe it'll come back. More just,
Anna, can I ask a quick question? Is
yes,
the Zodiac loading, is the door, do they have doors on both sides and they just load on the leeward side, or is there only a door platform for Zodiac loading on that, what is that?
Yeah, so there was only the one on the port side here.
Cool.
It's down on deck 2, so we all had to go down pretty low to get to it. It's just the one. Each Zodiac was 8 to 12 people. I think it depended on how many guides they had going out, and it depended on the excursion. So pretty small groups, but it went quick.
Cool.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. If my cabin was 304 and it was great, but it was right next to the anchor. So every time they dropped anchor or pulled it back up, it was very loud and right on the other side of my cabin wall, which was fine. It was pretty much always in waking hours, but I know some people might be sensitive to that. So if they have a choice, maybe don't put somebody who's going to be cranky about noise in that cabin. More ice, more penguins. So this afternoon they had told us that the weather was bad, that we probably wouldn't get a landing. Not even necessarily because of the fog, but because of the wind. But then they did find this place called Gordon Island, which had quite a few penguins left. So it was a colony of gentoos. I didn't get a number of how many, but these were pretty active, definitely more so than the Adelies that we had seen so far. And this was the most that we had seen in one place so far. So this was fun. We didn't get a long time here, maybe an hour. Just sitting and watching them run around, fussing at each other. We did see a whole bunch come in from the ocean at one point. That was pretty cool, getting to see them. I think it's called porpoising when they all leap over the water. But again, they were molting or starting to molt, so some of them weren't really moving around so much. But they can make some noise. And I did not realize it, but they're very cute. I could sit and watch them all day. And then so the third day of excursions, we started out the morning up in the South Shetlands, specifically on Livingston Island, which is one of the largest, at a place called Elephant Point, named for the lovely elephant seals. Again, I was shocked at the size of these animals. They are so big.
Yeah.
Logically, I knew that, but then once we were on shore and they were nearby, I mean, it was, the size of a small car. So definitely kept my distance. This was one of the easiest landings that we had. It was a very smooth, flat beach. Everything else had been very rocky and required a lot of climbing, but this one was pretty easy. And then we went on a hike. So they did have a guided hiking option, which basically just meant you could wander a little further and have someone to pull you out of the mud if you got stuck. It was a pretty limited group. You had to sign up that morning at breakfast when they announced it, and then they charged the fee for it to your shipboard account. We got to go on a really cool walk around this island to a glacier and then climb up on the glacier, which was maybe not strictly allowed according to the guide. He kind of told us to maybe not talk about it too much when we got back on the ship, but it was pretty cool to be able to say that we stood on a glacier. And then one of the ladies in our hiking group, it turned out that that day was her birthday. So we all took a picture and sang happy birthday to her from a glacier, which is pretty cool.
Anna, did your guide mention if the elephant seals are commonly seen in the Weddell Sea programs? Because they are not commonly seen on the other side.
They did not mention it in that regard, but at this point we were not in the Weddell Sea. We were up in the South Shetlands.
Oh, you were in South Shetlands. Okay. Yeah, because you know, you don't normally hear about them on a standard Antarctica program that isn't going to Falklands and South Georgia. So that was kind of special. I'm just wondering how we could capture that for our other travelers.
Yeah. I was definitely under the impression that there was no plan to this. We were kind of just chasing good weather windows. So I don't think they really intended at the beginning for us to make it here. So I do consider it like a real treat that we did get to see some of the Shetlands.
Mary, just really quick, I know the early season departures, that same landing site, Elephant Island, is a popular landing because that is during their breeding season, and so they're all beached up at that point. So when I was there, there was probably over 1,000 of them on that same landing site. And so if you have people who specifically are interested, you could advise them towards early season departures.
That's good to know. Yeah, I know that's a really tricky landing to make. So a lot of times the ships, if they have it on their schedule, don't make that particular landing. So that's why I was wondering if there's other places they can see the elephant seals besides that. I haven't heard of any, but maybe there are.
Not that they talked about with us.
Okay. No, I just was curious because I haven't heard of any either. And definitely the Falklands in South Georgia, you can see them quite readily. But otherwise, this is the only one I know of, unless someone else knows of somewhere else. But this particular stop can be really, really hard to make, I think. So I wasn't sure.
It was for ours.
Okay.
We had to be very patient for ours.
Yeah. So still, we're kind of stuck with this landing. I mean, which is great if they make it. But if they don't make it, I don't want to hedge too many
Get
people
their hopes up.
Yeah. No, good to know. Thanks.
But if they can make it, it's a real treat, for sure.
You ladies are lucky. Very cool.
Yeah. There was plenty to see here. I spent most of the excursion time on this hike, but then by the time we got back, they let us roam pretty freely along the beach. Did get to see plenty of elephant seals. There were a lot more penguins there as well. I think most of them there were gentoos. They did talk about you could have taken a hike if we had landed in a slightly different area to go see the remains of a whaling station. But I did not get to see that on my landing there. Zan, did you get to see that at all? I mean, there were like whale skeletons on the beach. Like we saw a piece of vertebra that people were like, is that a tree trunk? And the guide is like, no, that is whale spine. But we didn't get to go see the huts.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing that on my trip, but that would have been cool.
And then definitely more greenery here than anywhere else. This was our furthest north stop. More fur seals and then more walking around. A very sculptural landscape too. I thought it was very interesting just to see it. And then that afternoon we went down to Deception Island, which I remember from doing like chats and leads, we would get a lot of people asking about this place specifically. I didn't expect to be able to go here, but they did say that we would be able to make a landing, so I was very excited to see it. This is probably the hardest landing to make in terms of getting the Zodiacs on the beach because it was a very steep beach. You were pretty much running into a wall and trying to go up, and our Zodiac did get flooded, so it was a good way to see why they tell you to wear waterproof pants because we're sitting there and the wave comes in, we're trying to surf it up onto the beach, and the timing was just wrong, so we were all like in water up to our thighs in the Zodiac and we kind of had to just jump out, so that was fun. But
Speaking of
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, continue.
No, go for it.
I was going to say something on elephant seals because I just remembered that we actually saw one on in Yankee Harbor. Yeah, in Yankee Harbor. So it's possible to see them. Sorry,
Them
I
in
just
other
remembered
places.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Very
Sorry.
cool. Very cool.
Yeah, we did see there were 1 or 2 here on Deception Island, but it was mostly fur seals and lots of penguins. I mean, as you can see on the beach here, it was pretty crowded with wildlife, which was definitely cool. But this was the highlight for wildlife because there were so many penguins. The naturalist told us there was anywhere from 250 to 300,000 penguins, plus their chicks, plus an unknown, or no, that was breeding pairs, plus an unknown number of single penguins, almost all chin straps. So the noise and the smell were incredible, but it was so cool to be able to just be surrounded by penguins. And they set up this really neat short hike for us from the beach where we landed up and across the island, not even the island, just like this little peninsula. And on the end of the hike, you got to this cliff edge where you could look down on another beach with all of these penguins coming up out of the ocean. So that was pretty spectacular. The hike was not long, but it was very slow going because you are not supposed to approach the penguins, but they sure like to approach you. And these ones were much more active. They were running around all over the place. So of course, if they cross your path, you have to stop moving. So it was slow going, but very cool to be able to just be absolutely surrounded by penguins. And I think we spent 3 or 4 hours here just taking it all in. But it was also a really interesting landscape. Because Deception Island is a volcanic caldera, so all of the soil is black, volcanic. I forget the name of the rock that is formed. But the beaches were little black pebbles rather than sand, and then the landscape itself had some greenery on it as well, some lichen and mosses. But you can see, like, they've got quite the little highways going, and they're chasing each other all over the place. This was probably the most fun stop for penguins. And I think a lot of other people, we'd been kind of not disappointed, because you really can't be disappointed in Antarctica, but we were a little underwhelmed maybe by the Adelies that we'd seen so far, and even the Gentoos. They were kind of grouchy, and there weren't that many of them. But here, just everywhere you looked, you were tripping over them, which was really good. And I think a lot of people were really cheered up by that. Definitely made us feel like the expedition team was kind of listening to what people wanted. I think they had a good idea of like what people wanted to see, wanted to do, and tried to make that happen for us. It made the entire experience feel very tailor-made, since all the decisions were being made based on weather windows and what people wanted to see. So lots of penguins, so many penguins. But it was really fun. They're adorable. Also that afternoon, we did do some cruising through what's called Neptune's Bellows, that very narrow entry into the inner part of Deception Island. So we couldn't make another landing. The storm was kind of coming in, but we did get to see like Whalers Bay and the remains of like the whaling stations and that sort of thing. Our expedition leader is really big on history of explorers and whaling in the area, so he did a whole little lecture, like as we were on the decks looking out. He did a little mini lecture over the PA system about what we were looking at. I admit I don't recall a lot of it because I was still so excited about penguins. But it was pretty cool. We also saw the Magellan Explorer. It floats, which is pretty neat. I think that was one of its second to last run of the season, although I don't know if it even got to make its last run because of, I won't even say it, the C word that we're all dealing with. Anyway, so the last day of excursions, whoops. There it is. We finally did make a continental landing. Everything else until that point had been islands. Most people, I think, were purists and definitely wanted to make a real landing. And they listened to us, which is great. We didn't get a lot of time there. At this point, there was we were told quite a bit of a storm system coming into the area, so we went pretty far south to, this is Orne Harbor, to make the landing, and we only got about an hour there. But it was really fun. One of the guides brought his guitar and led a little sing-along, which is kind of weird. I will never listen to Have You Ever Seen the Rain the same way again, of all things. But it was fun. So this was everybody, and then you can see some of our guides in the background, and then pretty much immediately after this picture was taken, that big glacier in the back started calving. And we all had to get up as high on the beach as we could because there were little, not tsunamis, but little waves were coming up on the beach, and it was not a large beach. So that was really cool to get to see a glacier calve and hear it, and then see the waves. Once that calmed down a bit, we got back in the Zodiacs, and we were just kind of cruising around that bay for a while. And then in the afternoon, we got to go whale watching. So this was our only excursion that was not land-based. We all just loaded up into the Zodiacs for 2 or 3 hours that afternoon and went to Orne Harbor. No, sorry, Orne Harbor was the landing site. This was Fournier Bay, which apparently has a really good krill population, which attracts a ton of whales. Pretty much everywhere we looked, we were seeing blows. So we kind of just picked a direction and then cut the engine, and they kind of just came up to us, which was really, really cool. Again, yeah, go ahead.
Did you feel disappointed that you didn't get to do more? Because I also we didn't do many like Zodiac cruises themselves on our thing. Were you wishing that you had like another chance to do a few more Zodiac cruises or not?
No, they were pretty good about
it.
I thought it was pretty good because they did a really good job, I thought, of kind of including the Zodiac cruises with getting to and from the landing sites.
Okay.
So especially because a lot of them were kind of smaller areas where we could only load one at a time, or they only had so many guides that they could only load and unload one at a time. While you were waiting your turn to be let off the Zodiac, they just cruised around wherever you were.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Which was great. So that was how the first day that we saw the leopard seals and that lone Adelie penguin. That was while we were just kind of like waiting to even make the landing. The guides were all really communicative with each other as well. Like you would always hear over the radios, like, "Oh, we just spotted such and such over here. You should come check it out. We're gonna go land." So that was really cool. It was a good feeling of like teamwork and team building. Like no one was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna tell them about that leopard seal. That's just for us." Like everyone would be like, "Hey, come check it out," but also polite about it too. I was definitely impressed with how they handled people who weren't so cautious about wildlife. Like Rachel, I remembered when you were in when with Quark that you said that they weren't very good about telling people off if they were getting too close to wildlife.
Nope.
Yeah, I was worried about that, but I was very pleasantly surprised that they're polite but firm about like, sir, you got to come away from there. Like leave them alone. This is why. I thought they did a great job of educating people like how to be good stewards, leave no trace and all that. It was great. I did see some people get fussed at for like bringing a snack on one of the landings. I mean, they're like, if you have a medical issue, if you're like diabetic or something, like you can bring something, but let a guide know. And some people were like sneaking and they're like, no, you cannot take that. So it was good to see them standing up for Antarctica in that way, I thought. But yeah, lots of whales today. And then, can't remember what picture I had coming up next here. There we go. So this is just more shots of whale watching, and it was fantastic. I don't think there's words to really properly share how small you feel when you're faced with these enormous animals, and they come up so close to you. Yeah, and I don't think photos do it justice either. But we had a good long time out on the bay there. I think we were there for 2 or 3 hours, and the whales would just come up to us and check us out and slap the water a bit. We did see one breaching. Didn't catch a photo of it, but it was very cool to see. And then that afternoon, I don't have pictures, but I did get to do the polar plunge, which was pretty cool. It was actually very cold, but it was very fun. And I'm very glad that they, again, listened to people saying that they wanted to do it. And so we got to do, as our guide said, offer a sacrifice to the sea gods for a safe crossing back. And I think it worked because we had a pretty smooth straight crossing on the way back.
Did you jump off the ship or did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Off the gangway, yeah. So they put down the gangway and had us all line up, and they were blasting party music and pouring shots that you weren't allowed to touch until you did it. We did have one guy, I think he was the ship doctor or something, jumped off one of the upper decks because he was suddenly in the water. We were all down below, and everyone's like, "Wait, where did he come from?" But he swam to the gangway and made it up. Yeah, it was very cool. Very cold, but over very quickly. And then, of course, they hand you a shot of vodka as you come out. Please forgive my wonderful, terrible pun here, but that was the trip, pretty much.
I greatly appreciate your pun.
Thank you. You may all groan into your any other questions or comments? I'm sure I haven't really covered everything from a sales perspective.
Do you have more pictures of the ship itself that you took? Or?
Not really, no. I didn't bother because when I looked online, it looked exactly the same. Pretty much. So yeah, what you see online is, I felt it was very accurate. Like I knew what to expect based on what we have. The cabins were what you see is what you get, which was great. It was comfortable.
I have a kind of a perception question. So it sounds like, it was kind of a little bit open-ended, which is very much counter to what I understood how a lot of this works. But did you ever feel at any point like they didn't know what they were doing and they were just kind of winging it the whole time? Or did you feel like they were still professional and knew, like they were still experts and everything? They were just a lot more easygoing?
Definitely the latter. Yeah, so I think some people were a little put off by not having a set itinerary. We didn't know where we were going until the morning of, sometimes the night before. Yeah. They would give us daily briefings, basically like, we're going to head in this direction because it looks like the weather is best over there, and we're going to go over here, see what happens. We're not going to make any promises about where we're going to land or what we're going to see. And then the morning of, they would say, okay, this is where we are, this is what we're doing. And this is why, this is what you're going to see here, most likely. But I never felt that they didn't know what they were doing. Our expedition leader, I thought he was fantastic. I can definitely see how his personality might have grated on other people because he could seem kind of harebrained and all over the place, especially rarely giving a direct answer to things. But the actual experience that we had was, I think, worth it. I never felt like they didn't know what they were doing in terms of safety or what wildlife we were seeing or where we were.
That's good.
So I think any perception of the leader not knowing what he was doing was more a matter of him not necessarily being able to communicate it effectively rather than him not actually knowing what he was doing.
Gotcha.
My overall impression was everyone had been working there for a while. They knew what they were doing. They knew the best places to go to see what and why. And we were in good hands.
Awesome.
Experience.
Can you comment on sort of the social dynamics for a group of that size? That's definitely among the smaller ships that, we work with. I'm curious if you found the number of guests on board to be feel about right in terms of just how things kind of shook out with the social dynamics.
Yeah, it was a little weird. It was small enough that you felt like you should know everybody's name by the end of it, but I definitely didn't. It did get a little cliquey. The same people tended to sit together every other meal or so. I think the first couple of meals, people would spread out and try to make friends, and then they kind of figured out, like, you figured out really quickly who you liked and were going to get along with and who you didn't, and then just kind of settled into those roles, which I think was fine because then you got to know a few people really well instead of somebody new every day, which, I mean, for me personally, having to see new people every single day got exhausting. So it was really nice to quickly make friends and then be able to say, can I sit with you? And be able to pick up where you left off with a conversation. But I can definitely see how some people would get bored in a small group like that. And then we had a few groups, international groups, that didn't speak a whole lot of English, and they pretty well kept to themselves the entire time, which it's fine. I think people are going to do that anyway. But I thought it was a pretty decent mix of groups versus single travelers, and everyone mingled pretty well. I don't recall ever really seeing any like fights or people not getting along, or any one group being more unpleasant than any others. I think it was a pretty good mix of people, and good culture of like, we're all in this together kind of thing. So that was really fun. Like, even if you didn't know somebody very well, you didn't feel antagonistic towards anyone. It was a good mix.
Were there big partiers, big drinkers?
Not really. I think
Interesting.
there was one night that I stayed up kind of late in the bar and hung out with the crew. And it was fun, but it wasn't totally wild. I think we were all out of there by 11 midnight maybe. So not totally crazy.
Were there a lot of public areas that you guys hung out in, or was it mostly just like the bar and the
It
restaurant?
was, yeah, so it was pretty much just the Panorama Lounge. So which was also where the bar was and where all the lectures took place. Yeah, it was pretty limited in terms of public gathering spaces. There's a dining room, but no one ever really spent the day there. So almost all free time, what you were either in the library, which is pretty quiet, not a lot of people would gather there, or in the Panorama Lounge, and that was usually a little noisier. But it was a good place to just go and be social. They always had like a coffee tea station, and usually had like crackers and cakes and cookies set out so you could snack throughout the day. So a lot of people would go and have coffee like while we were cruising from one place to the next, hang out, take pictures. It was a good place to look for wildlife because it's windows all around, and then you also had direct access to the deck as well. So I think that was where, if you weren't in your cabin, you were probably in the Panorama Lounge.
Did the expedition team members mingle with guests during social times?
A bit. I think it depended on who it was. Since it was a mostly English-speaking group of travelers, those expedition crew who spoke English as a first language tended to mingle more. The rest could speak English, but they tended to keep to themselves a little more. They would, those who would speak Spanish spoke it together. They would speak Spanish with the Spanish-speaking travelers, of course, but they didn't mingle as much. And I think it's also a cultural thing as well. The American crew would be a lot more gregarious than some of the others, which made sense. It was a pretty international crew. Handful of Americans, handful of Brits, handful of Chileans. I mean, it's a Chilean company, but then we also had some from Poland, Russia, and China as well. So that was definitely interesting and fun. It was good to have a mix of perspectives, and they had all done work in Antarctica before working for Antarctica 21. So they had all been either scientists or researchers. There was one who had done a season at a research base. Actually, two of them had, one as a more of a cultural aspect and one more as a researcher. So they gave some really interesting lectures. Yeah, any other questions?
This is Dan. I just want to say I am so thrilled that you had such a great trip, and I love your photos, and you deserved a great trip, and I am really glad you got one. So
yeah,
thank
me too.
you. Yeah, I feel so privileged and so lucky to have gotten to go, especially when I did, because I think it was right on the tail end of possible.
No kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I got back into Missoula on a Wednesday, and that Saturday was crazy Saturday that the office was full. So
wow, yeah,
it was about as good as the timing as it could have been, I think. So yeah, just feeling very, very lucky. All right, thank you for coming from
Thanks,
your
Anna.
lovely homes. Stay healthy, stay
You
safe.
too.
You too.
thanks, Anna.
Thanks,
All right.
Anna.
Thanks,
Bye.
Anna. Bye.